Hello and welcome again to our wonderful podcast. I am Linda here with Mike, and I'm wondering, Mike, if you could give us a bit of a recap as to where we are and what we've discussed. And then, guess what? We have some questions for you, Mike, from
Okay,
some of our viewers,
fantastic.
which are very welcome. All right, I'll let you go for it now.
Okay, so in this podcast series, we're exploring and discussing social threefolding. And this is a proposal to decentralize and restructure society into three independent yet interdependent areas: the economy, the political rights state, and the free cultural life. So last time in our third podcast, we had been looking at the middle of the second preface of the book called The Core Points of the Social Question. And in particular, we were talking about the part about education. So the author of this book, Rudolf Steiner, believes that we must develop new ways of thinking to address our existing social dissatisfaction and dysfunction and bring about positive social change. But the question is, how do we learn to think differently? And we're talking about the education system because education really needs to shift into a separate and autonomous area of society that is the free cultural life. And we had a longer discussion about how teachers must be autonomous and the education system must exist within a separate and independent free cultural life. Free in the sense of no economic or governmental strings attached. So today we're going to go on to talk about what Steiner says about education in this preface, and then we'll move on to a discussion about the healthy economic life. All right? So now I'm curious, what were the viewers' questions that we got?
Yes, thanks for that, Mike. So, for episode number two, this viewer asks, I am wondering how the threefold idea relates to the French Revolution's liberty, equality, and fraternity. Are they the same thing exactly? If not, what are the differences more specifically? And how do the three areas, cultural, legal, political, economic, map to those three elements: freedom, fairness, and fellowship? And what did Steiner mean by them specifically in simple and practical terms?
Okay. Well, that's a kind of a big question, but I'm going to say that Steiner does speak directly about the connection to the threefold principles to the French Revolution in this book that at the end of chapter two. So we
Mhm.
will come to that. But maybe for now, I'll just say yes, there's a connection. Um, there we can think about the ideal of liberty. Liberty is not in the social threefolding way of thinking is not only outward freedom, it's also inner freedom. That is the freedom of will. And the idea of equality, or really fairness, is what we seek within the fair rights life based on a democratic process, something people in the French Revolution were fighting for. And the economic life really falls under the ideal of supporting our fellow human being in providing for the needs of others and having others provide for our needs, and thereby connecting us all together into some sort of vast network of mutual support and care, which is the ideal of fellowship,
Hmm.
right? So I hope
Wow.
that
Okay.
answers the question.
Definitely. I think it is a very good. Okay. So for episode three, this viewer says, I really find it interesting, but I may need to listen to it again to fully grasp it. However, I actually wonder if the majority of people feel there is even a need for change in their thinking and mindset. Um, who are, are they even willing to think differently? And what could motivate more of the general population to want to change their thinking beliefs, especially those who already hold positions of power and don't question or observe their thinking?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So,
Mm,
so I would say Steiner is writing this book based on the facts of World War One. So he wrote the book in 1919, and his idea was really that the war took place because of the way we think about politics, about economics, about the military, about national cultures and national identities, and so on. And he believed that the devastation and the subsequent discontent and the revolutionary upheavals that followed were all the result of how we think. And he also recognized how unpopular it may be to suggest that there might be something wrong with the way we think and that we might learn to think differently because people don't like to hear that. Yeah, so but this might just be a truth that in order to move forward in terms of social progress, we must break free of the old and perhaps we can say cherished habits of thinking that really rise out of old institutions that no longer suit us. So if we want to be free, does it not make some sense to start by freeing our thinking, to become more creative about social institutions and ways of being with each other? So I think it's kind of it's important, yeah. So regarding the larger question, how do we change the thinking of people in power? The problem is that the people in power benefit from the way things are for the most part, and such people would probably not be all that willing to change their thinking. And so I don't really think this is addressed to those people. I mean, maybe they're not excluded, but I just think they will. There's a tendency for them to be resistant. And so
mhm,
what we need to do, in my view at least, is we need to start from a more grassroots level and build new institutions that demonstrate a better way. And once
mhm,
people see how things work in practice, I think there might be more openness and willingness to shift their thinking as well. So
mhm,
I guess I'd see it as a back and forth process. The new
mm.
thinking will lead to new institutions, and then the new institutions will support the new thinking. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's really loaded there. There, you said so many things, and I think that this was an excellent question. I really sort of hitting the nail on the head in terms of how do we create some shifts and the people in power not really being welcoming, and also the fact that you're talking about how Steiner says that wars happen because of the way we think. I think that really, especially in the days that we are going through right now, is such an important thing to just contemplate and recognize that we are somehow contributing to what we're experiencing because of the thinking process, I guess, is what I'm hearing. Am I correct in saying that? Yeah. Okay. All right. And one more question, if you've got the,
Yeah.
okay.
Sure.
Um, this person says, I wonder if you could, if you feel there may be a risk of teacher burnout from combining teaching and admin responsibilities, or for the potential of inconsistent accountability or nepotism if teachers govern hiring, salaries, etc. Would there be external checks in Steiner's view? Would they be helpful? Another good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. As a former teacher myself, I think the idea here is that if the teachers were to have an administrative load, they would have a corresponding lighter teaching load, right? And they
Mhm,
wouldn't be expected to hold two full-time jobs or something. That's
mhm,
not the idea. And not all teachers would have the same responsibilities either. So I think Steiner's point was more that there should be no organizational body having governance powers over the teachers telling them what to do,
mhm,
right? Now the administration, I think it's fair to say, in his mind should flow out of the teaching practice and not the teaching practice flowing out of an administration. And
Hmm.
so it's inevitable that the teaching faculty as a whole also needs to take on responsibilities that go hand in hand with having all the say
Hmm.
and with having governing power. And this power must be kept in check externally through laws and regulations. Like, for example, there might be a table or a fee table where people get paid according to a schedule, and it wouldn't be a matter of negotiating your own salary and things like that. So there would be some sort of external regulation of certain things, but
Okay.
and these could be monitored by from the outside by parents, by regulatory bodies, the state, the legal system. You could sue people, whatever, but it wouldn't be done internally. There wouldn't be like the government wouldn't sit inside the school, is I think the
Hmm.
picture. Yeah.
Okay, and so and Steiner feels that that would make a big difference for the teachers because they would feel like I know what I'm going to say, whatever salary hopefully would be a fair salary, live so that they could live with, you know, and it would be worthwhile their their exertions. Um, and but they would have more autonomy in the fact that they know what the salary is. I've chosen to come and have gotten the job. Now I get to do what I feel is right for the children and right for the community.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see how that sits. But I'm excited to kind of go forward. And see what else Steiner says. And we're still on the preface,
Yeah.
right?
So let's turn now to the book, and I'll turn on the screen share. Okay. So yeah, we left off on in the preface that he added to the new edition of the German edition of 1920, and we were on page 13, and we had last read this paragraph, "Anyone who thinks," and I
Hmm.
thought maybe I could start by just recapping that paragraph, and then we can go on to the next paragraph, and we'll read
Sure.
forward. So, so this last paragraph, as you recall, you may recall last time. He's saying basically that educators become out of touch and impractical only because they're not allowed to set out their own guidelines. Only educators who are themselves directly involved in practical life will raise children to be practical. Likewise, only socially sensitive educators can educate socially sensitive children. And so, an education is essential to the social question. And the opposite to this, the antisocial, arises not only through economic institutions, but also when educators are forced to be out of touch because their actions and their curricula are given to them from outside.
Hmm.
So, is there anything you wanted to say about that before we move on, Linda?
No, I'm good to go
Good to
forward.
move
Yeah.
on. Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, he's going to talk a little bit more about education. So, the next paragraph, the state sets up law schools. And
Hmm.
again, I'll just warm it up a little by saying it's not a long paragraph. At the present time, the state, the government, establishes law schools to teach jurisprudence according to a particular region's existing laws and constitution. If, by contrast, the law schools were established entirely through the free cultural life, then new thinking could arise that could fructify the right state from outside. Okay, want to read that, please?
Yeah. The state sets up law schools. It demands that these teach the content of jurisprudence that, according to the state's point of view, it has laid down in its constitution and administration. Institutions that emerge entirely from a free cultural life will draw the content of jurisprudence from this cultural life itself. The state will have to wait for what is handed over to it from this free cultural life. It will be fructified by the living ideas that can only arise from such a cultural life.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
So the main idea I think is that if we have an existing set of laws and the state or government runs the law schools, then it really just perpetuates the same thinking. And if we had a different way that the law schools themselves were moved into an independent cultural life that was independent of the government, they could think more freely about laws and then bring new thinking into the state from outside.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think, and he's suggesting, I think that this would make a more healthier government
Right.
administration and so on.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like anything. If we get too bogged down, you were talking about the traditional, like religious, or, that everything being sort of bogged down to that one institution, or secularism, and being that becomes bogged down. There is no free thinking. So I think the general idea that I'm getting is, hey, if we actually free the cultural life, then we can have some, or grow some wonderful free thinkers that could change the paradigm so that it's a healthier, more, I kind of want to say, a more alive process rather than a dead one kind of thing. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
correct or not, but yeah.
Yeah, well, having new food to eat instead of regurgitated food kind of, yeah.
Ew. That does hit the point there,
Any
yes.
image. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
Should we go on?
Yes.
Now, this next, it's also another short paragraph. Um, so he's going to say something like that, how individuals become practical through their own unique abilities, their experiences, and their viewpoints. People do
Mhm,
not become practical by being taught by out-of-touch educators, even
mhm,
if these in turn are given direction by practical administrators. It is the educators themselves who must be practical.
mhm.
Okay?
Okay. Now, within this cultural life itself, there will be those people who grow into practical life from out of their own viewpoints. Nothing can become practical which stems from educational institutions shaped by merely practical people, in which out of touch people teach, but only what comes from educators who, from their perspective, understand life and practice. How a detailed administration of a free cultural life must be shaped will be at least hinted at in this book. Hmm.
So in a way, he's saying something similar to what he said in the previous paragraph. The educators themselves can't just stay in a little bubble of educational theory, and the educators need to move into practical life and then come back and teach others, and that way you have a new thinking again, even in the
Hmm.
educational area. That's how I'm reading this.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is really something that, if we haven't experienced something and we only know the theory, and then we're teaching the theory without having experienced, it's not as authentic, I kind of find. And, if a teacher is able to bring both the practicality of life and their experience and their sensitivity to what the cultural life is, or needs, then is he saying that the kids will kind of follow suit with that, or am I missing something here?
Yeah, I think he's saying that the children need to be raised by practical people themselves and not people who are just given direction from practical people.
Okay,
And then the children will become practical.
okay, okay.
So the practical people he's referring to in this paragraph are seem in my understanding at least are you take it, say people from business and you put them into the school administration, and then
Hmm.
because of their business experience they come into the school, and then they know how to work to run a school. And the reality is that the if the teachers themselves don't have practical experience, they're merely like being led around by these possibly practical or possibly not people. I mean, having experience in the business world isn't necessarily what you need as a background to run a school because school is not a business in the same sense,
Right.
right? So you can have these conflicting interests, and really, if the teachers themselves have the practical experience and then they do the administration, then they will know the right way to do this.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
That's my
Okay.
reading anyway. Yeah. So
All right.
should we go on?
Yes.
Now, this next paragraph has two footnotes to it. There's one right here, number 4, and one right here, number 5. So I'll
Right.
just read the footnotes first so that it gives us a better understanding of what we're about to read. Now, the first footnote is at the word spiritual workers. And
Mm-hmm.
so this was a translation. So the German word Geistesarbeiter, I've decided to translate as spiritual worker. And this is somebody who labors using their mind and intellect more so than with their body. So this is what is meant by spiritual worker. It's again not something oogly boogly. It's just somebody who works more creatively with their mind and not physically so much. Like for
Mm-hmm.
example, a teacher, physically they might draw something on a blackboard or whiteboard, and physically they're doing something, but that's not primarily what they're doing. So they're classified as a spiritual worker.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other word, the other footnote is number 5 next to the word achievements.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also a very important concept for Steiner. In German, the word is Leistung. So the German word Leistung is translated throughout this book as achievement. In the
Mm-hmm.
case of goods, like bread, a distinction is to be made between labor as such, which is Arbeit in German, and the
Mm-hmm.
achievement of this labor, which is Arbeitsleistung.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the distinction between the act of baking and the bread.
Mm-hmm.
So, the act of baking is the Arbeit or the work, and the bread is the achievement. And,
Mm-hmm.
and similarly, for the German word Dienstleistung, meaning service, a word that Steiner does not use in this book. So, for instance, the act of cutting hair, which is the labor, is distinct from the haircut, which is the achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And Steiner considers only the achievements as belonging to the economic life. So,
Mm-hmm.
as a translation for German Leistung, the word service might be used, but only if this were understood strictly in the sense of the end result,
Right.
the good-like achievement of human activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we
Mm-hmm.
say, haircut as a service in the service industry, are we talking about the labor? Or are we talking about the achievement? And Steiner's very clear. It's the achievement, not the
Got it.
labor. Yeah. That's
Mm-hmm.
the service, the Dienstleistung. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
this is important for our discussion, but I'll just warm up the whole paragraph for us now.
Mm-hmm.
So he begins by saying that utopian-minded people might wonder if artists and other spiritual workers will flourish better under a future threefold society compared to today's society, which
Mm-hmm.
is so dominated by state and economy. But let us remember that social threefolding is not a utopia, nor does it advocate any rigid design. It strives to create communities of people who live together and collaborate to improve things. And such real life free cultural communities will be in a position to decide how the achievements of artists and other spiritual workers are to be evaluated. Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
So do you want to read it, please?
Sure. Utopian-minded people will approach this book with all sorts of questions. Concerned artists and other spiritual workers will say, all right, but will talent flourish better in a free cultural life than in the current one overseen by the state and by economic powers? People who ask such questions should keep in mind that this book is in no way meant to be utopian. Nowhere in it is any theoretical setting in stone. Things should be like this or that. Rather, communities of people are advocated for who, by living together, can achieve what is socially desirable. Anyone who judges life based not on theoretical prejudices, but on experience will say to themselves, someone who creates out of their free talents will have the prospect of a correct assessment of their achievements. If there exists a free cultural community that can intervene in life from its own perspectives.
Okay, thank you. So
Mhm,
we're now sort of transitioning, starting to transition from a discussion of the cultural life to the discussion of the economic life. And how do these connect together?
mhm.
So, do you have any thoughts about this paragraph?
Um, it's, I mean, uh, what I'm hearing or understanding from this is, it's not, again, it's not going to be a utopian sort of thing, but um, there'll be sort of freedom from the cultural life to decide how how someone is remunerated
Mhm.
for the achievements. Is that what I'm getting? Yeah.
Yeah.
So rather than sort of have it dictated somehow from the economic life, um, the cultural life will, I guess, engender, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but sort of help determine if, teachers are getting X salary or artists or the work is so valuable that they're getting Y salary uh, or commission. Is that fair?
Well, I think what he's saying is that this is not a utopia where magically, we create a free cultural life and suddenly there's funding for everybody to become painters and sculptors. And,
Right.
I think there's a reality, yeah, an economic reality that the community has to come to terms with because everyone who's writing a novel or doing something in the cultural life is still a consumer, right? Somebody needs to make their food, their clothing, their shelter, and so somebody needs to be doing this work.
Hmm.
And it's not a utopian idea where magically suddenly everybody can just retire and do what they please. Um,
Hmm.
it, there's a reality here that we have to consider that the community has to balance what kind of free cultural life can we afford in relation to what we're willing to do to provide for these people that are not providing food. They're providing cultural needs, perhaps, but
Hmm.
but who's providing their physical needs? And so there needs to be an agreement around these different questions, and it's not
Hmm.
magic, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like in that particular community, if there's a lot of I don't know, if there's a lot of people that have really fast growing hair, then the hairdressers will be very, very valuable to them. Maybe more valuable in a community. I'm being really silly, but in a bold community where the hairdressers maybe not as needed, perhaps. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the sentence is right here. He's advocating for communities of people who living together can achieve what is socially desirable. So
Hmm.
so if people have a strong need to have fancy hairstyles and they put a lot of effort into this, well, that means there's just isn't going to be resources to put in effort into other things. And so
Hmm.
it's a matter of prioritizing. If if it's very important that everyone has a lot of leisure time, well, then that means they may not have a large choice of food products or something else. So
Hmm.
it's really a matter of the community deciding its own relationships around what it decides is desirable in a social sense.
Got it.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. And it's not a theory that says, oh, social threefolding means everybody's going to be. become an artist. I think that's just there's a reality here as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, let's move on to the next paragraph. And this one goes over to the next page a little bit.
Hmm.
So this is he talks about the social question, and this is in the title of the book, The Core Points of the Social Question. And so this social question, which refers to the how the working class people ought to relate together with capitalists and the ruling classes, this question did not just arise recently, and nor can it be solved easily, not even by a parliament. It requires ongoing attention and ongoing solutions. In modern times, the antisocial continually arises, and this must be dealt with anew each time, just like hunger continually arises and must be satiated anew each time. There are no permanent solutions. However, collaborative communities, such as the free cultural life, can continually work to shape life in a positive way. All right, so why don't
Okay.
you read that?
The social question is not something that has arisen in human life in recent times that can now be solved by a few people or by parliaments and then remain solved. It is an integral part of the entire modern life of civilization, and now that it has risen, will remain a part. It will have to be solved anew at every moment of world historical evolution. For in recent times, human life has entered a condition which allows the antisocial again and again to emerge from social arrangements. This must always be dealt with anew. Just as an organism repeatedly passes into a state of hunger a while after eating, so does the social organism pass from order in circumstances into disorder. There is no universal medicine for ordering social conditions, any more than there is a food that satiates once and for all. However, people can join such communities that, through their living collaboration, continually give existence a social direction. The self-governing cultural member of the social organism is one such community.
Okay.
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's a very important piece in my mind where we really do need to keep on continuing to monitor and respond to and resolve perhaps the antisocial sort of because again it's like I like how he's um, likening it to hunger. There's no one food that will once and for all take away your hunger, and there's no one solution because each and every time an antisocial experience happens, it maybe is a unique occurrence, and we need to respond in that present moment, and we won't be able to preempt it sort of beforehand. It's like when it appears, we need to, I guess, convene and have a wise discussion around what could work and help the community, I guess. That's what I'm imagining.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's just exactly what he's saying that the antisocial will always adapt. Like we can sit down and make a plan. We can write up a constitution or bylaws or something that so our imagined community is perfect, right? And then we start it happening, and then we find that people will find ways to kind of subvert it. And we always
Hmm.
have to then adapt. We can't think of it as a permanent, it's like an organism. It's constantly needing to change and adapt and we always have to be thinking and communicating and I'm thinking of Eleanor Ostrom's work in commoning, where she has this notion of graduated sanctions. And so if somebody does something against the community, you have some kind of warning. And then if they do it again, you kind of ratchet up to a next level until there's some kind of higher consequence. And
Hmm.
that way it kind of creates guardrails and it keeps the community social,
Hmm.
for example.
Sounds like a reasonable
Hmm.
sort of,
But I think it's fair to say that you can't just solve this problem and then, oh, we're done. We're
yeah,
finished. That's not a reasonable way of looking at this.
right. Have a philosophy
Yeah.
that covers everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We do need to do our homework and set things up in the right way, but we'll find that any system will have holes and flaws that we need to keep
Sure.
patching. Yeah.
Hmm. Cool.
Okay, so we move on.
Yep.
So on page 15, the just as free self-government paragraph.
Hmm.
So I'll warm it up by saying that we have seen how the free and independent self-government is necessary for the cultural life. And now we will turn to the consideration of the economic life. And we will find that economic associations are necessary. So the economy encompasses the production, the circulation, and consumption of goods. Goods satisfy people's needs, and so everyone has an interest in the economic life. What each person needs, only they can know, and what each person contributes, each person must decide based on their circumstances. This is true for a modern economy, which is not the case for everyone on Earth today.
Hmm.
Okay, go ahead.
Yep. Just as free self-government emerges from contemporary experience as a social demand for the cultural life, so does associative work emerge for the economic life. In modern human life, the economy comprises the production, circulation, and consumption of goods. Human needs are satisfied through it. People and their activities stand within it. Everyone has their own interests in it. Everyone must participate in it, whatever share of activity they can. What someone really needs, only they can know and sense. What they ought to achieve, they will judge according to their own insight into the life circumstances of the whole. It has not always been like this, and it is not like this everywhere on Earth today. It is essentially like this within the currently civilized part of the Earth's population.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I think what he's saying overall that at least for people who are in a position to do so, we have some freedom to decide what our needs are and what we want to achieve for others in exchange to get those needs satisfied.
Mhm.
So in other words, the way I would think of it is um, if we have very high standards, want to live a certain high lifestyle, and I have a lot of needs, if I decide that, then I also need to provide a lot to others, give a lot of achievements, production or whatever, so that this can be exchanged for what I desire. And if I'm on the other hand a person who maybe has low achievement, I just don't want to work so hard, then I need to accept that my needs are not going to be so much either, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I don't think Steiner is an advocate that everyone works the same and everyone earns the same. I don't think that's consistent with his views about freedom
Right.
of the individual free will.
Mhm.
But so we kind of just have in the economic life to balance the our perceived needs that we decide ourselves and what we also decide to do for others
Mhm.
in exchange.
Right. And that's, I guess, an important distinction between sort of socialistic or communistic kind of points of view where everybody gets the same salary, everybody has to work the same hours or whatever, no matter not even thinking about how hard one job is and the other and all. Yeah. So this is a very, I mean, like he says, like we, for some part of it at least, not all, I guess, we can choose how hard we work. We can choose the vocation that we would like. For, again, not everybody, but for the most part, in the civilized Western kind of world, at least, and maybe in other parts of the world as well. And I, yeah, it's not a perfect system, but yeah, we do. There is an ability, sort of, to do that within our civilized uh, part of the Earth population, as he says.
Yeah,
But
I'm going to just make a comment about this word civilized because, again, he's writing at the beginning of the 20th century, and I think in those days there was a different discussion around, things like colonialism and a different viewpoint about so-called civilization or whatever. And so you have to understand he's speaking in his contemporary language. Probably today we wouldn't say that.
mm,
But
mm,
as a translator, I felt I just would write down his words and we can
mhm,
caveat that. I don't think he was being dismissive. I just think he was speaking out of the language of his times,
mhm, mhm,
so that his audience would understand him.
mhm.
And I also wanted to say that I think there's in this paragraph, it brings up a discussion of this. So there's a certain slogan associated with Karl Marx, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
No,
This
okay,
you haven't?
no.
Oh, okay. So I'll just say a few words then, because this was a slogan. I'll repeat it: from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. And this was Karl Marx didn't invent this, but he popularized it in his 1875 critique of the Gotha program book. And the idea is basically that each person in a socialist framework would work according to their ability,
Mhm,
but they would not be rewarded according to their ability. They would only be receiving according to their need. So that people that had a high capacity for work or for giving to others would only receive what their to get their needs met, and everyone in the whole society would receive according to their need.
mhm.
And Steiner made comments about this, in particularly in his collected works 195, Lecture 5, which I'll refer to. That's the 1st of January 1920. In the lecture, he basically spoke, and I'm paraphrasing, he considered this slogan to be very abstract and that it would lead to the creation of a highly unjust social order in the short term in the name of a belief in a more highly evolved human being in the long term, right? So that's basically what he says in this lecture. And I would say, in Steiner's view, the needs belong to the economic life, while the abilities belong to the cultural life. So in this slogan, the middle area, which is the rights life, is left out. The principle of fairness and justice, in Steiner's view, is to be carried by a third area. And so within the rights life, a proper relation can be established between the entitlements and the obligations. That is, between receiving my needs from others and giving to others out of my abilities. So this third area, the rights life, would mediate these two polar opposites. And then the reference for that is in Collected Works 331, Discussion 5, which was in Stuttgart on the 24th of June, 1919, if people want to look that up. And so in the short, Steiner considered the Marxist slogan, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. He considered this to be true, but abstract. A threefold society is needed to overcome the inherent duality so that a fair balance can be established between abilities and needs, between giving and receiving.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, I think a lot of us want to, I mean, many people would like life to be more fair. And certainly these theories that have been brought into fruition, um, and I mean, the Karl Marx's sort of iteration. Yeah, I'm really glad that Steiner could see that it would lead to an unjust society because, as far as I've witnessed, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, any part of the world that has tried to implement these socialistic or Marxist ideas have needed to have a big kind of tyrannical sort of leadership to hold people to it because it was really unfair. If you're working so much harder and earning so very little and barely able to make ends meet, even though your dwellings are, part of the state given to you, standing in line for food, that's not a fair system at all. And then when the leadership is living in opulence, and if you speak against, because God forbid if you have something to say about the system. So this gives me a little bit more hope, and I'm really curious as to how that balance of the needs and the rights, and sort of that free cultural life kind of manifest in Steiner's mind, how that would work. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just respond by saying the capitalist system is not that much better. You see,
Hmm.
it has maybe other advantages and other disadvantages compared to socialism, and in practical terms, there are theories to both, and then there's the practice of both socialism and capitalism.
Hmm.
And in capitalism, we have that as well, that you have this extreme opulence of
Hmm.
certain people and extreme poverty of other people.
Hmm.
And so I don't think the issue is it can be resolved on which should we choose, which bad system should we choose. And I think what Steiner's asserting with the social threefolding is that we can't do it as a dualism. We have to do it as a threefold balance. And so we have on the one hand the needs of people. That's a very important thing. That's the economic life, what people
Hmm.
need and how production, distribution, consumption works to satisfy those needs. And then we have the cultural life, the life of abilities like education and training and skills and how that relates to the needs. And then you have to add this middle space, as you say, to bring about the fairness. And you can't just have these two things, these polar opposites, hoping they'll just magically be fair. You need a third in the middle to bring about this fairness. And that applies to both socialism and capitalism. So threefolding, I think, is the future. We just have to stumble our way towards it.
Point taken.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hmm.
Okay, good. Is there anything else we'd like to say about this?
No.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next. Now we're going to dive into the economic life. So he's saying the principle of in the previous paragraph, the principle of the cultural life is free self-government, free self-governance, we might say. Whereas in the economic life, the principle is associative working. And so we're going to talk about what this means. Now, in the next paragraph, yeah, he basically says that over the course of time, he's giving a little history lesson on how the economy developed. So over the course of time, we had the closed household economies, and these evolved into the city economy. And then these in turn evolved into the state economies. And now, today, we really have a world economy. So the past and the future forms are always present simultaneously. And it is highly significant to realize that this social evolutionary process has now largely ended as it is culminating in our modern world economy. So let's read that.
Okay. Economic circles have expanded over the course of social evolution. Out of the closed household economy, the city economy evolved, and out of this, the state economy. Today, we are faced with a global economy. A significant part of the old still remains in the new. In the old, much of the new already lived in outline. But the fate of humanity is dependent on the fact that in certain life circumstances, this evolutionary series has largely been completed.
Yeah, so once we've reached the world economy, we can't really get bigger than that until we become multiplanetary, right? Then we can
Yeah.
talk the next step. But for now, this is the pinnacle of what the size of the economy,
Mhm,
right? So
mhm.
I'm just going to expand a little on some history, if you don't mind. You may know that the word economics is a Greek word. Ökos meant the household, and nomos something like management. So economics literally meant the management of the household. And
Okay.
in ancient Greece, this was sometimes the enormous task of managing the oikos, the house, which later the Romans would call a domus, like where we get the word domicile or
Mhm.
yeah. So in Greek and Roman times, a very large household might have many slaves, many servants, and an attached farm. The household was where all manner of food production was undertaken, the milking, the churning, the butchering, along with purchasing, preserving, storing food. And of course, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the childcare, the senior care, and other processes like textile production, spinning, weaving, tanning, collecting wood for fuel and lumber, building, maintaining, and so on and on. So running a household in that time, especially if it's a large household, was a big job. And this task was usually divided between the husband and the wife. The male head of the household was known in Greek, as the Kyrios or the oikonomos. And this, sorry for my bad pronunciation, the male head of the household was legally responsible for all of the household's affairs, including the finances, the legal representation, the welfare of the family. Whereas the wife was usually responsible for all the day-to-day management of the domestic affairs, which included the child rearing, the managing of the servants and slaves, and overseeing all the other activities in the domos or the oikos, right? So if you take this imagination of the household economy, we have to then imagine how this evolved into the management of the economy of an entire town or even an entire city, with a city being a walled town. Yeah. And then widening further still to the national or state economy. So a nation being a group of people that speak the same language, let's say, like, right? And now we've grown into the world economy. So this is the picture here. And I want to say that a world economy is defined as one in which not only the products are traded globally, but they're also produced or manufactured globally. So they might be, I'll give you the example of I'm going to put a link in the description here about a video that I think is great about pears, pears that are grown in Argentina. Then they're shipped to Thailand, and in Thailand they are packed into these plastic containers, and then from there they're shipped to all different places like North America where they're actually consumed. So they're kind of a global production process grown in Argentina, packed in Thailand, consumed in North America. And this is part of the world economy now. And the video that I'll put in the description is great because it demonstrates why that is actually more efficient. It's very interesting.
Okay, that is
Okay.
very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this is how things have evolved. And so the idea was out of the closed household economy, we've grown into the world economy.
Hmm. Right.
And now we've kind of reached the end of this process. This is the important thing,
Hmm.
at least for now.
Yes, at least until we're multi-galactic.
Right. Multi-galactic, multi-planetary to start with.
Yes.
Okay, should we move on to the next paragraph?
Yes, let's do that.
So in the next paragraph, he's saying it's not logical to organize economic forces in an abstract top-down manner because economics has largely evolved in a healthy way from the bottom up. So national economies have often, however, arisen in a top-down way through political forces, not merely economic forces. And it creates chaos to want to convert these state entities into purely economic communities. Economies evolve best of their own accord, independently of state influences. And to continue this evolution in a healthy way, we must form independent economic associations, a bottom-up idea. And these associations would consist of representatives of people who work out of non-political, purely economic viewpoints. The associations will evolve of their own accord in a practical way, not becoming too large nor too small. These will be such that they do not create undue bureaucracy. All right, so let's have that read that.
Okay. It is nonsense to want to organize economic forces within an abstract global community. Individual economies have, in the course of social evolution, largely merged into state economies. However, state communities have sprung from forces other than merely economic ones. The fact that people wanted to convert them into economic communities brought about the social chaos of recent times. The economic life strives to shape itself using its own forces, independently of state institutions, as well as the state's way of thinking. It can only do this if associations form which join people together from circles of consumers, traders, and producers, according to purely economic viewpoints. The scope of such associations will regulate itself through the circumstances of life. Associations that are too small would be too costly, and if too large, they would be economically unwieldy. Each association will find a way to regulate business with the others based on the needs of life. We ought not be concerned that someone who must spend their life constantly moving around will be constrained by such associations. They will find it easy to transition from one to another if economic interests rather than state organization bring about the transition. Within one such associative system, institutions are conceivable that occur with the ease of monetary transactions.
Okay, so this is a kind of mysterious. If you don't know more about this, this seems like a very odd paragraph. Like he's speaking about something. What is he talking about, right? Is that
Hmm.
fair to say, Linda?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
so I want to just give in a little background to this because Steiner really doesn't explain it. This is the only thing he says really about in this preface is the only time he really speaks about associations in this entire book. But what he says in the preface is very sketch like it's like a sketch like not sketchy, but it's like a sketch only, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And so um, he elaborates on this in a different place in Collected Works 332A, Lecture 2. he gives a whole lecture on what is an association. And so I'll just sort of summarize a little from that lecture, if that's all right. That
Yes.
his picture is, again, it's a bottom-up process. So people would start by connecting existing producers. And so not bringing in producers, but who's already producing things in the certain region or area, a town or city or whatever, a community, we call it. So in this community setting, how much is being produced, and is the production meeting what people are needing? Because if the production is too if there's too much production, it can happen that the price of things is too low, right? So if there are two, let's say I like let's say eggs, for example. If all the farmers are producing so many eggs and there's a flood of eggs on the market, then the price of eggs will be down. And on the other hand, if there's too few eggs being produced, then the price of eggs is going to be high. And the different price of things has a different consequence. If the price is too low, that's bad for the producer, isn't it?
Hmm.
Because they're not getting enough to get their needs met, you see? But if the price is too high, that's bad for the consumer because the consumer has to pay a high price for eggs and then they can't get other needs met with what they have left over. So the idea is, and we'll talk about this later in the book, this notion of the right price or healthy price. The
Hmm.
right price or healthy price is one where the producer receives enough to get their needs met and the consumer gets enough to get their needs met. And this healthy price, how do you decide what that is? And
Hmm.
this is the task of these associations. They look at the production, so they have representatives of producers, they have representatives of consumers. And importantly, they have representatives of retailers and traders, wholesalers, because those are the people that kind of stand in between the producer and consumer, and they know what's going on, right? So you get all these people, representatives of them, that is, not all the people, obviously, that'd be a mess, but
Hmm.
to have some people that are sitting down with expertise, and on the basis, they kind of build a picture of what is the whole picture of the economy here. And let's say they look at the price of eggs and they say, well, we need to be producing more or less. So
Hmm.
the producers kind of work together because it's in their interest that both, they get enough, but at the same time, the consumers get enough because in most cases, producers are also consumers, aren't they?
Hmm.
They also have to have eggs. So, um, or whatever food, right? So
Hmm.
the point is that it's in everyone's interest to find these healthy prices and then not like a price management. It's not a price management concept. It's what I would call a supply management concept. So by adjusting the supply up and down by agreement amongst the producers, the existing producers, you can bring the price into the right range where it's more healthy.
Hmm.
And that these groups would then work. There would be maybe a local association here and a local association there, and they would also work together amongst each other so that there would be a network of these local associations.
Hmm.
Does that help to build a picture of this?
It does. So things that come to mind of some things that are perhaps similar, and I don't know enough about the economics or anything like that. But as you were talking about associations that come together, people sort of, like the petrol people of the world. I can't remember the group names.
You mean the
Um,
oil and gas, like fossil
yeah,
fuel producers? Yeah.
yes, yeah, that come and decide, okay, we're gonna have this is the global price kind of thing. And there's questions that I have around, so what if one producer doesn't play fair and wants to have the whole gamut and decides that they're going to play some dirty tricks as they certainly do in the capitalist or any other system, to bribe or to hey, store manager, you buy from me and not from Fred over there. So that it requires, I guess, uh, people that have integrity, maybe, a real will to benefit the community. I guess is
Well,
the anti, this describes the antisocial sort of aspect of things.
yeah, I don't think Steiner is painting the picture of a utopia that it's
Mm.
everything, the whole world is going to depend on the goodwill of people. I think it's kind of I think the group you're speaking of is OPEC, which
Yes,
is the
that's right.
oil. Um, they are a cartel, it's called, right? So
Mm.
they sort of collectively decide to withhold production in order to raise prices for their own benefit without
Mhm.
regard to the consumer, right?
Mhm.
This is not the idea here.
Mhm.
The association would be a group that brings in the consumer and the consumer has a voice in the decisions about the process on the one hand. On the other hand, um, I think it's not going to depend just on integrity. Steiner speaks about the importance of contracts and that there would be probably a kind of system of quotas, is how I imagine it, where people would have so many a quota and that they have to meet and not more or not less. And there would be punishment like sanctions or graduated sanctions for missing these quotas. Because
Mhm.
if you overproduce or underproduce, then you're not working together in an associative way. And if producers, for example, continually do this, they may find themselves excluded and then sanctions brought against them, boycotts or whatever. And so the community has to kind of work together. It's a voluntary notion, but it's not really a cartel because it's not a one-sided pro-consumer group or pro-producer group because consumers can do this too. They can create a situation where they're adjusting the prices for their own benefit as well. So
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
really the idea is to bring together all these groups and then sit down in a non-political framework and look only at the economic results. So yeah, maybe I'll just stop there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Sorry, my dog's having a field day with conversing with other dogs. Let's put it. Um, so I can, there's a lot more questions that I would have as to how this would work, and but it seems like a really good framework to begin with. Um, certainly perhaps creating a different world, a better world for, or attempts to create a better world for all involved. So the needs of people being addressed, the needs of the producers, the needs of the, um, the sellers and the everyone in between. So, okay, sorry.
So maybe, yeah, maybe we could stop there for today. And why don't you give some more thought to your questions and maybe our viewers can also come up with questions. And we'll start there, pick it up again next time because I think this is a very important topic to explore. And if there are questions, I think we should address those right now. Because again, he doesn't really speak about associations anywhere in this book except here. So this is the time to talk about it. All right?
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for yet another wonderful podcast. I really hope that people are enjoying it as much as I am and learning so much. Thank you again for your explanations and your answers to my questions. And really, everybody is welcome to ask any question, and I will try and get Mike to answer them for you. All right. So, with that, we say adieu and see you next time.
Well, thank you, Linda, and thank you everyone for listening. Bye for now.
Awesome. Bye bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.